Welcome back to the TMBC Wake YouTube channel. If you haven't entered the surfboard giveaway yet, make sure to get over to that video and get yourself entered. I'll put a link right above me, I'll put a link in the description below, and I'll put a link at the end of this video. Okay, so for today's video, I decided I'm going to let you follow along while I do some gel coat repair on my 24 MXZ. The method I'm going to use is not typically the best method for perfect results. It's more of a method for getting better results. The repairs I'm going to be performing are on some factory flaws that I saw when I first received my boat. Now keep in mind, if I wanted to, I could have pointed them out to the dealer and left the boat with the dealer, but I felt as though I could do a pretty good job of fixing them, and they weren't terrible. It was just something I've been wanting to make look a little bit better ever since I received the boat. And I actually did some work on both of these to try to make them look better right after I received the boat. It ended up needing some gel coat added to make it look better. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into these repairs. Okay, so the first one I'm showing you is on the top edge of the port side. I noticed this little white mark when I first got the boat. I tried to sand it out because I thought it was just a surface scratch, but it ended up making it worse because it is a flaw all the way through the gel coat. And you can see that I put a little divot in it when I sanded because I was just doing it with my finger as opposed to a block. The next one I'm showing you is in the walkway to the bow on the port side as well. There's a gouge, and it looked much worse when I got it, but I sanded it out and made it look shiny. But now I want to fill that in. The first step I'm taking is I'm taping off the area that I want to sand. You need to make sure you sand it with 400 or 600 grit before you put any gel coat down, so that it can adhere to the surface. If it's a shiny surface, polished surface, waxed surface, the gel coat will not stick. It will end up just flaking off over time. Now I'm using 400 grit wet sandpaper. It is best to use wet sandpaper with gel coat. You can use dry sandpaper, but when you're sanding down your final coat, wet sandpaper will help the process go much easier and quicker. The next step is to tape off the area that you actually want to put gel coat on. And I sanded an area bigger than the area that I wanted to put the gel coat on. That way the gel coat adheres to every part that I want it to. So you sand a little further out from where you want to add the new gel coat. The next step is to clean that surface with acetone or some sort of grease and wax remover. Could be alcohol. There's a couple of different things you can use out there. I'm just choosing to use acetone. The next step is to prepare your gel coat. Gel coat is like an epoxy. You have to mix a hardener in. This gel coat I actually ordered from iboats.com. It is a Spectrum product, and it was a gel coat patch kit, and it's specific to the colors of my boat. I'll put some information about that in the description below for those of you who want to look into that. But you definitely want to make sure you get the exact color for your boat. Unless you're doing work on the very bottom of your boat, then it's not as important to color match. And the kit comes with the hardener, but if it does not, if you only have gel coat, you don't have hardener, you're going to need to pick some up. So this is what I'm using, and there's the part number there. I also suggest you put some gloves on when working with gel coat, because the stuff can get on your fingers and it's hard to wash off, and it's just a pain in the butt. And obviously be very careful around your boat. I do have a rag down so I don't get it on my vinyl. If you did get it on your vinyl, you want to clean that stuff off really quickly. So I'm just putting some of the paste in a tray. I'm actually using the package it came in as my tray, and then I'm adding some hardener. And you're actually supposed to only have about 1.8% hardener. They say 12 drops to an ounce ratio. I actually found out later that I probably added way too much of the hardener, which is still okay, but you can have problems with your material shrinking. And also, I think it causes more air bubbles. I couldn't get it to where I didn't have any air bubbles, but definitely if you get that mixture right, you'll have less air bubbles, and your setup time will be better. If you add too much hardener, it can actually take longer to set. So that 1.8% or 12 drops to an ounce ratio is the best. And you just want to mix that up really, really well. There's a couple different ways you can apply it. You can see I'm just using a spoon, but there are some squeegee tools you can get, some different tools you could probably find out there to apply it. I'm going to use a wax paper method though, to kind of get it laid down. And it's okay if it's not perfectly flush or whatever you want to call it, because you're going to be sanding it down. So you just want to make sure that it covers enough of the area that when you sand it down, it will be filled in. So although this next step is not required, it's a step that I generally will use, and that's to put a piece of wax paper over the top and then kind of squeegee it down. So you can see I'm putting a piece of wax paper on, taping it on one side. And then I'll tape it to the next side. And in this case, I actually added some tape, extra tape around it, which is again not required. then I'm taking my sanding block and I'm kind of just lightly squeegeeing that so that it fills in and is kind of level, mostly level across, so that there's not any really low spots and really high spots. Trying to just get a more level surface. And you can kind of see some wrinkles, which is fine. Again, you don't need it to be perfect. I'm just trying to kind of eliminate some bubbles and kind of get those high and low spots knocked down a little bit. Otherwise, you'd just be sanding a lot. Okay, so I let that cure overnight. Ideally, you're going to want the temperature to be between 70 and 80 degrees for it to cure properly. And if you can't do that, I've put a light on it at different times where it'll keep it at temperature. You know, just try to keep it at that as best you can near that range, because it will dry, and it'll dry within generally 5 hours. And be ready to sand, and you just want it to cure appropriately. If it's not cured yet, if you come back the next day and it feels tacky, you just got to wait longer for it to harden. But again, if you keep it in that 70 to 80 degree range, it should harden within about 5 hours. Probably even quicker, but that's probably the best amount of time to wait before you start sanding. So I've removed the wax stripper. Now I'm going to start sanding. I'm showing you my sanding block that I'm using, which is just a kind of a off-the-shelf sanding block from AutoZone or something. The black side is hard, the yellow side is softer. So depending on what you're sanding, generally I'm going to be using the hard side to sand. I'm starting with 400 grit until you get it about flush. So you basically want to sand with 400 until it's flush. And you can see that I'm leaving the tape on to do the sanding, and that's so that I don't end up sanding areas that don't need to be sanded yet. I don't want to accidentally be scratching or sanding down an area that I'm not intending to sand. So I'm leaving the tape on. Also a tip, I'm actually using Auto Body tape. It's actually a thinner tape, and it holds up to wet sanding better. If you were to use just blue tape for doing house painting, it's not going to hold up to much sanding at all, and it's also thicker, so you'd end up with a thicker layer of gel coat. And Auto Body tape is a little more expensive, but it's well worth it in the end for doing this type of work. So once you get it sanded down a little ways, you can pull the tape off. In fact, you don't even have to leave the tape on to sand it. If you want to, you can just pull the tape off and sand the whole thing. You just risk wearing down the gel coat outside of it, and then you end up having to repair that as well. So I like to sand it with the tape on for a while anyways. And you can actually, as you sand through the tape, you can just keep replacing the tape and continue sanding. So you can see that there's still some low spots, and there's all the air bubbles in there. With this patch repair kit that I have, I've not had a scenario where I didn't have some air bubbles. So you just generally want to try to make sure you get enough on there that by the time you get down through the air bubbles, your repair is still good, so you're not sanding all the way through, which I've been able to do for the most part. You want to keep sanding with the tape on, like I said, you keep replacing the tape until you get the edges flush with the surface. And as you start getting close, keep your eye on it, because 400 grit will go through the gel coat pretty quickly, so you don't want to actually wear down the gel coat surrounding it. You could, if you're worried about it, you can go up in your grit to 600 or 800 and it won't go down so fast. But yeah, basically you just want to get it down to get the edges to be flush with the rest of the gel coat. Once the edges are flush with the gel coat, you can remove all of the tape or most of the tape, and then your next step is going to be to move up in grit. So I'm going to go to 600 grit next. You can see I'm checking to make sure it's smooth and flush. And I'm gonna tape just outside of where the sanded area is, so that way as I sand with the next grit up, I'm making sure I get all of that 400 grit sanded to 600 grit. And I'm adding a piece of tape at the back because I noticed that I accidentally scuffed that area with the 400 grit. I had a little scratch back there, so I'm just trying to prevent that by putting on a piece of tape at the back. So now I'm sanding with 600 grit. You don't have to sand with 600 grit for too long. Just make sure you get outside those areas and you sand the area that you sanded with 400 grit pretty well. And then you basically just repeat that process going up in grit. So I'm going up to 800 grit next. And taping a little bit outside that those sanded edges. And now I'm going to move on to 1000 grit. So again, taping a little bit outside that sanded edge. And next I'm going to move on to 1500 grit, and I took all the tape off. It's kind of up to you whether or not you want to do this, but basically I'm not worried about tape once I get to 1500 grit. Just kind of trying to keep in a specific zone. And then I move to 2000 grit, and then I move to 3000 grit, and then I move to 4000 grit, and finally I do 5000 grit. If you're doing the bottom of your boat, you probably don't need to do 5000 grit. 5000 grit would just make sure you get that extra shine finish. So you can tell that after I've done my first pass, it looks better, but that flaw is still sticking through. It actually looks more like it did when I first got the boat. So I'm actually going to do this process again, and that's basically how it goes. I mean, if you want it to be absolutely perfect, you have to keep repeating this process until you get the results you want. You can see this time I'm actually grinding out that area, so I can kind of grind out that flaw, so that way that when I'm done, the left area, or when I fill it in, it won't see that flaw anymore. And I'm just using a Dremel tip. It's a kind of a stone sanding Dremel tip. I just put it in my drill. I actually like how my drill works in this scenario better. And then I skipped the part where I added some more gel coat, and I'm just showing you me basically sanding it down again. And because I'm working with a much smaller area, it's actually going quicker. Okay, and then after you're happy with the results, I'm now putting on a polishing compound. So I'm polishing it, which there are different levels of polish you can get. I'm using a heavy cut. You can then use a finer cut and get it really shiny. But then after my heavy cut, I'm happy with it. So I'm just going to be putting my hydrosilex back on. You can see that I still have a little tiny white dot, and that's because there's the tiniest little air bubbles that were left, and the polish got stuck in those. But I'm actually way happier with this scenario. It looks quite a bit better than what it looked like before. These little tiny air bubbles that have a little bit of polish in them are actually very tiny, not very noticeable. So actually went back and did it a third time because I just couldn't handle those two little white dots, and I got it looking near perfect, which I'm a lot more happy with. Now I'll show you the rest of the walkway repair, and I'll just speed up that process. So I was actually very happy with how this one turned out. It's actually in a spot where it's hard to notice anyways, but this one turned out pretty dang nice. And you'll be able to tell in the comparisons that groove is gone, and if you were to look really closely, you'd barely see the outline of where I patched it, but that generally goes away because it still actually cures over a few more days. And also, I'm probably going to be the only one that ever would be able to pick that out, because it would be so hard to see unless you were using a magnifying glass or something to that effect. And that's how gel coat is. If your color is perfect, you still with like a magnifying glass, you could still pick up where the edge of that was. So here are some final comparison videos of how my repair ended up. I'm happy with both, but as you can see, they're not perfect. They're basically just a better version, or basically just made to look better. And that's exactly what I was going for. So again, the method that I used was kind of the patch repair kit, wherein you use gel coat and you mix it with a hardener and you lay it in. And obviously you can see that I used wax paper, I sanded it down. The other method, and the method that you would use if you wanted it to be perfect, would be to spray it. Which you can do that with a pre-valve sprayer, which is much less expensive than getting your own air compressor gun. And then you would mix it. You'd also mix a thinner end so that you could spray it. There's a couple of different products out there you're supposed to use when you thin it. I think styrene is one of those. There's another one I think called like Dura Gloss or something like that. But those methods are different, and definitely would be another video. And if I ever do that, I'll definitely share it with you. When you spray it, basically you'd spray it on in multiple layers. And then you just sand it down and it would definitely flush in, you know. And if there was any filling to do, you'd need to do a filler and then spray. And also to touch on metal flake. Metal flake, from what I understand, you would not want to do it this way. Basically, metal flake actually comes separate, so it actually is like a glitter, or like an actual flake, a dry flake. Typically what you would do to get metal flake on is you would spray you'd spray one thin layer of clear coat, and then you'd blow the flake on, which I think at the factory they do that with guns. And then you'd spray multiple coats of clear over top of that, and your final coat would have actually a wax additive in the clear coat. So much different process, because as you sand down, you don't want to be sanding the flake at all, because it can do what's called silvering, because it is actually a metal flake, and it has color on it. So as you sand, if you actually sand the flake, it'll start to look silver. Which would be fine if you were working with silver metal flake, but if you're working with different colors, that would not end up looking good. The other thing about metal flake is that there is no way to just do one little section like I did in this video without being able to tell that that you did that patch right there. You'll be able to see the outline of where you put that the metal flake there, from what I understand. And so what I'm told, or what I've researched on how you would repair metal flake, is that you'd have to do the whole section, or wherever you'd have to at least go to where the boat changes. So like where maybe it goes into a different curve or angle, you'd have to do that whole section until you get to those different angles. And in that scenario, you're doing a much bigger area, and so I would suggest that unless you're doing a very, very small area in a spot that is very unnoticeable, leave it to your dealer or a professional to do the metal flake. But as you can see, if it's a solid color, then you can take it in your own hands to do that repair if you'd like. And just a little disclaimer, I'm not a professional by far. In fact, I'm actually bringing you along with my learning process, as I've done this a few times, but I'm continuing to learn from it myself. And just sharing that information with you. Again, I want to say that this is not a method for making it perfect. Would be more of a method for making it better. It's a great method for if you have chips or damage on the bottom side of your boat, because then you don't have to make it look perfect, because rarely is the sun shining on the bottom of your boat, so you can get it close to perfect or pretty good, and it still will be a good repair. So I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also leave comments below if you have some tips to share about doing your own gel coat work. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you can be notified of my future videos. We'll see you next week.